This is my mom, Wendy.
Hello.
And so we're just gonna, basically, what we're doing here is just talking about real life, talking about struggles, different things, really just different things about life that hopefully to let other people open up. And there's this book that I read recently that talks about the gift of giving, of going first. And so if we are open about our struggles, if we're open about the problems that we have, then we give the gift of going first, and it allows other people to be able to go second and be able to talk about their stories and their struggles and the problems that they have. So anyways, today, I don't know, just earlier today, we were just talking a little bit about your story and talking about the things that you've been through. And I mean, there are a lot of different angles, different things that we could talk about, I suppose. But I guess just one of the things that we were initially talking about is just growing up into your young adult life, the fear and the anxiety that you struggled with. So I guess you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, it was very bad. I didn't know that it was anxiety for a long time. I thought that physically I was dying for many years. But this side of it, I can look back and see how I was anxious all throughout my childhood. There were times when I remember being a little kid and not being able to even swallow my own saliva in the car. But we were in a big family, so I could hide it easily. I didn't tell anybody because I didn't know why I felt like that. It was weird. So I would take napkins or Kleenex and just spit my saliva into a napkin or a Kleenex and keep going because I couldn't swallow all of a sudden, but I didn't know what that was. And then it would go away. We'd reach where we were coming to, and it would go away, but it would happen sometimes. So I can look back and see how I had anxiety when I was a kid. And then it was shortly after you were born, I remember actually having my first kind of issues with anxiety and panic, except I didn't know that's what it was. I thought something physically was wrong, and I would go to the doctors and have tests done and all that stuff, and nothing was ever wrong. And I thought something is really wrong because I felt inside something was very wrong. I would have chest pain and pain down my arm and numbness in my hand and tingling, and my heart would race and I'd be short of breath and all that. But I would go and get tested, and nothing supposedly was ever wrong with me. And so I remember when you were little, before Alicia was born, you were probably a year or two old, my doctor just said to me, "Oh, just go home and drink a glass of wine before you go to bed every night." And I thought, well, how's that going to help me? You know, drink a glass of wine every night before I go to bed, and then what's going to happen? I'm going to be an alcoholic or be dependent on alcohol to make me feel normal. So I didn't want to do that, and so I didn't. And so it continually got worse and worse and worse over the years until it was at its worst after Nick was born in 1992. Was my worst year before I started actually getting better from that. And it had got so bad in 92 to the point where, again, I was having trouble swallowing. And so all throughout that year, there was actually, I remember one trip in the middle of the night to the hospital because I thought I was having a heart attack, and Dad had to, we got you guys up, and Dad had to actually take me to the emergency room, and there was nothing wrong with me. And as that year progressed, at the end of that year in October, I turned 30 in 1992. And I remember on my 30th birthday, and if you go back and look at pictures of me on my birthday then, I was very, very thin. And I had actually lost so much weight. I weighed probably maybe 105 pounds. I had never weighed that little, ever. And it was because I couldn't swallow because of my anxiety. But I didn't know that's what it was, really. And I just remember being scared because I thought I was just going to die, starve myself, or malnutrition or something like that, but I couldn't swallow. It would literally take me to drink an 8-ounce glass of liquid, sometimes 4 hours or more, because I couldn't. It would literally have to go down almost a drop or two at a time because I could not swallow. It's like if I put something in my mouth to swallow, my throat would close around it and I would choke. So it got very, very bad. All the way, like I said, that year was my worst before I started kind of coming out of it.
So how long was it total that you felt like that then?
like I said, I can remember instances when I was little, but when it really kicked in bad was shortly after you were born. So that was 1986. Mm-hmm. My worst year, it got worse and worse and worse. My worst year being 1992, and then actually recovering out of that time period of my life was actually it didn't happen instantly. You know, it was a long process. So that was a number of years after that too, till it was totally gone, and then didn't have it anymore.
Well, and one of the things that, I mean, when we were talking earlier, she was telling us and telling us about, my dad had actually found a letter that she had written during that time, and it was just kind of like a personal thing to get feelings out, and on the last page of 4 pages or so, you know, she decided, oh, I'm going to give it to my dad, her husband. And he had kept that all these years and just recently gave it back to you and said, like, you know, I'm sorry I couldn't help you with this, and, you know, I'm really proud of you for doing that, for getting through this. But, I mean, in this letter, one of the things that stuck out to me is the fact that you were talking about another situation with someone else, and you said, you know, you said that if you were to ever lose one of your children, you wouldn't be able to live. That would be the biggest fear that you would have. And unfortunately, for those of you who know our story, and who know our family, that was true. My brother died when he was 15 of leukemia. So how does somebody who, I mean, has actually written that down, verbalize that on paper, how does somebody actually get through that? How do you get through that when your worst fear came true?
Well, maybe I think I'm gonna read that section of this. Okay.
Yeah.
So I won't read the whole thing because it's 3 pages long, and it's just very sad because this is who I used to be, and I don't know that person anymore. It's like I had 2 different lives, and this was one life, and now I'm living my second life, which is totally different. So the one section that's the hardest for me to look at in this is where I talk about you kids, because, you know, I've always, from the time I was a little girl and I had dolls, I would just imagine what it would like to be like to be a mom and have babies of my own and name them and hold them and feed them and love them, and so it was always something my whole life that I could hardly wait till I had my own children someday. And I just, you know, I tell you all the time, I just love you 3 kids so very much, and having the 3 of you has been the most meaningful thing that I've ever done in my entire life. And so this time of my life, it was really hard. It was hard to read this about you guys because I was in a really bad place. I was 29 when I wrote this. And he says here, I'm afraid of dying and leaving my babies with no mother. I think that's my worst fear, and it brings on all these other fears. I've seen people who've lost their mothers before, and they seem different. I always want to be here for my children, but sometimes I think, though, that they would be better off with a different mother, one who is patient and kind. So many times I just feel sorry for the kids. Josh is the smartest, most thoughtful little boy, and all I do is pick at him and yell at him. I expect him to act so grown up all the time, when I should remember that he's only been on this earth not even 6 short years. He deserves a happy, carefree childhood, and I'm stealing that away from him. I don't yell at the other kids as much. They're younger, and I guess I don't expect as much from them. I just don't seem to tolerate them much. Alicia jabbers on and on. Half the time I can't understand her. It annoys me, and I tend to ignore her and act like I'm listening. Nicky hangs on me and whines so much. It also annoys me, and I get upset and try to push him away. Then I remember Joan's friend Belinda, who lost her little girl, and how she must long to hear her jabber on endlessly and feel her hanging on, wanting to be held. If I ever lost any of my children, I don't think I could live, so why do I treat them so badly? I want to change so badly. I have to change for the sake of Josh, Alicia, and Nicky. I think if I could get this anxiety under control, then everything else would follow. And then I just say I wouldn't feel like I'm choking all the time. I would sleep better, feel better. I could be a different person. Right now, I don't really like who I am. There are so many other things I need to write. but I would go on forever. So that was, for me to actually write a letter, handwrite a letter, was desperation for me, because all those years I kept it inside because I thought all my thoughts and all the things that I were feeling, it seemed weird to me, or like I didn't know how to explain it to people. And so I didn't say anything, and I suffered really silently. I didn't even tell your dad for very, very many years because I didn't know how to say what was wrong with me. I just knew all these weird thoughts I was feeling, and all these anxious thoughts didn't seem to make any sense to me because there was nothing going on that should have made me anxious. But I was, very much, till I was almost housebound. I almost couldn't go anywhere anymore after all those years. And so when I wrote that letter, it was just a plea for help and a desperate cry of like, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what else to do but just write it all out on paper. So trying to help somebody understand what was going on inside of me because I didn't know how to say it.
Yeah. So then all of that, then what got you through everything that happened with Nick?
Well, thankfully, the Lord took me through this time after I wrote that letter, and in the years to come, this process, He brought me through this process of healing where I really learned a lot about myself and about my anxiety, and kind of what God showed me, first of all, was that I didn't trust Him at all with anything. I was trying to hold on to everything myself and control everything myself, and I was anxious because I knew I couldn't, but I wanted to. Like I wanted everything to be good and right, and everybody to be okay, and I always felt like I needed to be the one to do that. I mean, I kind of had that on me from the time I was a kid. I'm one of 7 kids, and my brothers and sisters used to always tell me I was my dad's favorite, and that if anybody needed anything from Dad, I had to go talk to Dad because he would listen to me and nobody else. And so I always had this feeling like I had to be the one to hold it all together for everybody all the time. And that when you do that, when you're that person that holds everything together for everybody, you're not, that's a place where God is. God's the only one that can do that. There's not a person that can do that. And there's a lot of anxiety with that. And that was really at the root of kind of why I went through this. And so as I started to come out of it, God began to show me He's in that place. He's in that place of control. He controls everything. I can't control anything. The only thing I control is how I react to things. That's the only thing that I can control. I can't control circumstances. I can't control how other people react. I can't control when bad things happen or when good things happen. But I can control how I react to those things. And I learned a lot through that time. God took me through that time. There was a lot of junk I had to talk about and bring up and talk with my family about that happened to me growing up. And that was helpful to get all of that out. And as God took me through that process, to know that He was totally in control, I began to just really be able to live for the first time when I was free of all of that. And it's interesting because after He took me through that time, since the year 2000, really in the last dozen years, have honestly been the worst nightmare years I've ever lived in my 50 years. I'm 50 years old. So, I mean, and I'll say this, but you know this because you're my son and you're in this family, but Mike, my nephew, Mike, my sister's son, died at the end of 2000, and he was 25. And a year later, almost to the day, gosh, you remember being at Grandma and Grandpa's when Grandpa had that bad stroke? And I was there helping Grandma take care of him through the night, and he was having a bad stroke, and his one side of his body stopped moving, but he had a do not resuscitate order, so they wouldn't take him to the hospital because they wouldn't do anything for him anyway. So the emergency squad just said, just keep him here and watch over him through the night. And Grandma wouldn't let me call all your aunts and uncles because she didn't want to wake them up. So it was me and Grandma, and I was terrified all through the night to sit and watch my dad as he was dying. And that was a year after Mike died. 4 years later, Nick got sick. And not only did Nick get sick, but he was treated at St. Jude, which is in Memphis, Tennessee. So not only was I going through that, but God called us away for that time, and I had to go live alone with Nick. And you were at college, and Alicia was here with Dad, but for me to go to Memphis and take care of Nick when he had cancer and live in a place where everybody there, all these kids have cancer, and their parents, all the friends I made, their kids had cancer. Probably at least once a week, one of my friends would tell me they'd get bad news and their child was going to die. And I'm trying to work to save my son's life, and I'm trying not to be distracted by all these fearful thoughts and these fearful things, that this nightmare that I was living at the same time away from my family. And so then, you know, Nick was treated and he did well and he came home and stuff. So when we came home in that summer, I really felt like I had come full circle. And thinking about this, I just thought about something that I read in a Bible study this last week. You know, when the Israelites went out into the desert for 40 years, they wandered.
Yeah.
And wandered and wandered. Do you know when they came out of there, the first place they settled was a place called Gilgal with Joshua?
Okay.
Gilgal means full circle. They had come full circle, and they finally were entering into the promised land, and Gilgal was that first place they settled. So I felt like when I came home with Nick that summer, like I had come to my Gilgal. I had come full circle from that person who wrote that letter. I had come full circle into this person who all of a sudden I felt like I had conquered something without fear. And even though it was a fearful, horrible situation, we had done it. And Nick was well, and we were home, and everything was good again, and I had reached my Gilgal. God had brought me through. I did not have a panic attack or anxiety the whole time I was there. We just did what we had to do, and we, you know, Nick was treated, and so I felt like God had brought me full circle in my anxiety. And little did I know that I hadn't learned everything that he wanted me to learn, but the very thing that I always had feared the most, it's the worst thing, I think, for any, especially for any mom, any mother who carries a child that grows in their body and gives birth to, and they raise and love and nurture. The worst thing is for one of those children to be taken away. And 2.5 months later, after Nick and I came home, he relapsed. And when we went back to Memphis as a family, and you know, Nick was only there 4 days, and then he had that bleeding in his brain, and that was a horrible time, wasn't it? It was a nightmare, wasn't it? It was. And for 2 weeks, he was in the intensive care unit before he died, and he never woke up. But you and me and Dad and Leish sat around his bed and held his hands and talked to him and talked to each other. And do you remember that one day when Dr. Rubinitz came in the room and he said, I just need to talk to you guys. I just need to talk to you because the doctors and nurses out there are a little worried about you. Do you remember that day?
Yep.
And I said, why? Why are they worried? And he said, because they feel like you're too happy. And I said, happy? I said, look at Nick. His tube's coming out of everywhere. He's in a coma. It's one side of his head. He's got staples in because he had brain surgery. I said, we're not happy about this. There's nothing that we're happy about. But I said, what they're seeing and what they're feeling is the presence of God, and God is giving us peace, a peace that we can't understand. I don't know why I feel peace. I said, I'm horrified. This is my worst nightmare, but at the same time, I'm feeling peace, and I don't understand that. And I told him the Bible says that God will give us peace that passes all understanding, and that's what they're seeing. We're not happy. And he listened, and he's like, okay. And then he went out and told them, and it was all, he got that, and it was okay. But God, in the worst, most horrifying time of my life, I had complete peace in my worst nightmare. When everything was good and peaceful, when I was trying to control things and hold on to things, I had no peace. When I let go and allowed God to control, even though He took my son home with Him, and it was my worst nightmare, there was complete peace. It's like, my friend always says to me, God's the God of opposites. Like, how can there be peace and this is horrible? But there was peace. I never had peace in my life before. I mean, I would have periods of peace, but I never had that, ever. And all of a sudden it was there. And so I think it's just all about knowing that God is always in control of everything, even when we don't feel like it, even if we don't feel Him there, He's always there, He never leaves, and He will always bring that peace, even if it's in the worst of times.
Yeah. Well, what if somebody is going through that fear and all that anxiety kind of stuff? Like, what would you say?
Well, I would say, first of all, I am a very strong believer in that there is power in the spoken word. This is what I found true about my anxiety, is like once I realized what was wrong with me, the first step was for me to speak it out loud to somebody for the first time was huge for me. And I don't want to go into the details of this either, but when I was young, I was molested. I didn't tell anybody about that until I was an adult, and when I went to tell my sister about it for the first time, because I had been having nightmares again, to speak that out loud, I thought I was going to choke. It was that feeling again, like the words came to here, and they just... Do you ever have something really hard to say to somebody?
Yeah.
And it's like it almost gets stuck here, and you can't get it out.
Yeah.
It was like that, but then I said it, and it's like when you speak it out loud, something happens and it loses its power over you, because then all of a sudden somebody else knows, and when somebody else knows, then it's like, okay, it's out there and somebody else knows, and maybe I'm going to be okay now. And so I think the first step for anybody that's struggling with anything like this is to say it out loud to somebody that you trust. Say it out loud, and that will be the beginning of the end.
Well, that was good. Is there anything else that, even in general, or anything that you would think that you're thinking about, or that you would want to say, or?
Well, I've been a Christian since I was 14 years old. Not always living it, but certainly I remember the day that I became a Christian, so I know that's when I became a Christian. But I always haven't been living it. I'm sorry, anybody that sees this and remembers the days that I wasn't living it, I'm sorry I wasn't. But what I know now, after all the loss, and not only did Mike die and Dad, and Nick got sick and Nick died, but 8 months after Nick died, my sister Judy died very suddenly. Then Grandma got sick, and we brought Grandma here to live with us. Took care of Grandma, and she died here at my house. And then next year my brother John died, just 6 months ago, very suddenly too. So we've had so much loss in the last 12 years, since 2000. But never ever in my life have I trusted God more. It's that God of opposites again. The more I experience, the more I trust Him. And so I can say with certainty to anybody that God is somebody that can be totally trusted, even if things don't happen the way that you think they should, and often they don't. But He's good and He can be trusted.
Well, thanks.